We have Professor Goutam Ghosal as the speaker or plenary speaker for this session. Let me introduce Professor Ghosal. Professor Ghosal holds both PhD and DLit. He is Professor Department of English, Vishwa Bharati, a Central University, Santiniketan. Apart from Tagore and Sri Aurobindo, his areas of interest include 19th century British and American literature, Hemingway and Stephen Crane, Shakespeare's poetry, and Rabindra Sangeet. Ghosal's books include India's responses to Shakespeare, Sri Aurobindo's prose style, Sri Aurobindo and world literature, and Indian literature, points of view. He has also written books like Notes on the Renaissance, Rainbow Bridge, a comparative study of Tagore and Sri Aurobindo, and others. Professor Ghoshal is also the co-editor of the first reprint of James Cousin's 1917 book, New Ways in English Literature, which came out recently. Professor Ghoshal has lectured at various universities in India and abroad. I heartily welcome you, Professor Ghoshal, on this platform. Are you there, sir?
Yes, I am here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sir.
So
Once
I start.
again, welcome, sir. It's indeed a privilege for us to have you with us today as the plenary speaker. Your topic for presentation is Iceberg, the art of Ernest Hemingway and Satyajit Ray. I request you, sir, to deliver the talk. Over to you, Professor Goutam Ghosal.
So many thanks to the organizers, to Sudhir Nikam, to Prasant Mate, who have been my friends. And in fact, I feel honored to be here to speak. And it's really, I am humbled by this invitation to speak. And when Sudhir spoke to me, I was really delighted. And this is an area where I have a little bit of specialization. I mean, I have done a little bit of work here. So let me start straight because the time may be short. So the point is, as mass society started, film became more important than literature. Because, as you know, today in India, the mass society came in the 1980s. And people slowly moved away from the print to the film and now to Facebook. People have not much time to read. And initially, the great literateurs, the writers, they they had some reservations. Even Tagore and Virginia Woolf is famous for her objections. He called film a parasite and literature its prey and victim. And this was in 1926. He wrote it in an article called The Movies and Reality, and it came out in New Republic. But that is not accepted these days. The only thing that can't be transferred to film is poetry proper. Because you can be poetic. Shyam Benegal is poetic, Satyajit Ray is poetic, and quite a few Kurosawa is poetic. But you can't say it is poetry proper. Poetry is the highest form of art, and you can't transfer that to film because rhythm is the most basic characteristic of poetry. Rhythm cannot be transferred to another medium. That makes poetry eternally the greatest, the highest form of art. As a practicing poet, I know that it cannot be transferred, and poetry is unparalleled in the domain of art, and it cannot be transferred to any other medium. But literature, the other parts of literature, novel, drama, short stories, these can be transferred and they can be made more acceptable to the audience of today, because people are reading, knowing more through the media, through different mediums. And so people are now not, they don't have time for books. So why link Satyajit Ray or Satyajit Ray with Ernest Hemingway? So it came to my mind that they have certain things which are common: economy, the symbolic style, and the deceptive simplicity which we see in both the artists. Both are very deceptively simple, and which Ray influenced Sham Benegal, who is as poetic as Ray later. Now, talking about my theory, I will focus on the theory of Julie Sanders, his book, Adaptation and Appropriation. Sanders, certain phrases are quite important from Sanders. She speaks of updating, then political relevance, then amplificatory procedure. These are the phrases Sanders uses. Amplificatory procedure. And I will talk about just one film by Satyajit Ray, because that was in Hindi and many will understand that. It is accessible for all in India. So Sanders' theory point to the new form made out of literature, that is films. Now, Premchand's original story, The Chess Players, Shatranj Ki Khiladi, was expanded into a large historical canvas with great economy and subtle hints at the deeper stories of life. Now, originally it was a very short story, and if you have read the story, you will notice that Premchand only focuses on one plot, that is Mirza Sahib and Mir Sahib. The focus is entirely on that plot. But Satyajit Ray went to England and he studied the history of the times from 1856 to 1857. And his interest was in Wazid Ali Shah, and his interest was in Wazid Ali Shah, and also the Shakespearean concept of the poet king who is also the weak king. In Richard II in Shakespeare, we have the concept of the poet king who is also the weak king. Now, Ray was definitely drawn to this aspect of Wazid Ali Shah, and it was a wonderful portrayal. And apart from all his incapacities, incompetence as a ruler, he had some plus points. His taste for music, Indian music, and his subtle uh, appraisals of music, the dance sequence he arranges in the scene with in Rag Vairavi, which was done by a Bengali dancer. She's quite famous now, Sashwati, and so it shows that he is a man of refined taste. And despite the continuous criticism of Utram on his lifestyle, there are some plus points in Wazid Ali Shah where Rai focuses, and he uses the choric element with great effect, like the Prime Minister himself is a choric character, highlighting and sympathizing with Mahavidyalaya. Can you hear me properly? Can you hear me
Yes,
properly?
yes, sir.
Yes,
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 sir.
you are quite audible, sir. You are quite
Okay,
audible.
okay.
Yes.
So this subplot was totally invented, well researched, because Ray went to England and he had even the crown sketched, and it was a great research work. That was perhaps the last great film by Satyajit Ray. And because I think after 1977, he was not well, he was not keeping well. And once he said that filmmaking is a very tiresome job. So he was mostly writing stories instead of doing films. And I don't think, except for Piku's Diary, I don't think there was a great film by Ray after Satranj Ke Khiladi. If you want to place Ray's best films with the other films of the later period, Satranj Ki Khiladi is an epic film. And Ray was a master of music, both Indian and Western. And here, in the story of Premchand, you have just a skeleton, but Ray recaptures the entire atmosphere of old Lucknow with the help of music, with the help of classical and semi-classical music. And the old Lucknow comes back to us in a few scenes with the songs floating down to us in a low tone. And that creates the entire atmosphere. Unfortunately, Lucknow is totally lost these days. When I speak of Naushad, the great composer, and have recently last night I was seeing Naushad's interview, and I was seeing some slides from Lucknow, and I saw Lucknow at a very young age. I feel very bad about it that the entire old Lucknow is gone. They could keep the old things and made new things alongside it. But unfortunately, the old Lucknow of Naushad and that Satyajit Ray portrays is totally gone. It's a very sad thing because I saw Lucknow as a very young boy in the early 70s. So there are two narrations in Shatranj Ke Khiladi. One is by Amitabh Bachchan, which is in Hindi, mixed up with Urdu. And that speaks of the laziness, the lack of tejas, ojas, to borrow the from the Indian poetics, the lack of ojas and tejas in the kings and the jamindars, and they were all engrossed in the lighter things, in the lower things, lower vital things of life. And that has taken away all their power. They're oblivious. There's a focus on the point of oblivion. Everything is forgotten that we are kings, we are rulers, we have to fight it out. And Satyajit Ray, of course, as Sri Aurobindo also says, the Mughals were Indians. Sri Aurobindo, contrary to many Hindu historians, Sri Aurobindo was the only Hindu-oriented historian who defends Mughal civilization, Mughal art, Mughal painting, Mughal architecture, because it contributed to Indian culture, and he calls it Indo-Persian structure, Indo-Persian architecture, Indo-Persian art. So the narration of Amitabh Bachchan focuses on that story, while the narration in English by Satyajit Ray himself, it focuses on the historical events. And the interesting point in Satyajit Ray is, and both in Hemingway and Ray, is this, that they hide many stories within one story. Under one story, they hide many more stories, as I will talk of the Snows of Kilimanjaro of Hemingway. Here also in Satranj Ke Khiladi, Satyajit Ray invents many things, many stories are hidden behind in these 129 minutes film. Frustrated human relations between husband and wife, adultery is there, the psychology of the colonizers, the feelinglessness of the colonizers for the poet king. He may be a weak king, but even Utram's secretary, he speaks beautiful Urdu and he has a feeling for Wajid Ali Shah. And he also is used as a chorus. Satyajit Ray knew how to use the chorus with a masterful effect. And I have never seen in literature, except for James Singh in Riders to the Sea, such an economy in using the chorus in film. In Riders to the Sea, there are two dialogues that speak of the choric element. Is it Bartley this? Yes, it is Bartley. And he passes on quickly from that, and that creates the atmosphere of chorus in Riders to the Sea. Ray also, like Hemingway, was a great economizer of speech and action. Now, I have chosen two less talked about stories by Hemingway. Both were filmed. One is The Short Happy Life of Mr. Francis Macomber, that came out as Macomber Affair in 1947. The director was Jolton Korda, and it ran to 85 minutes. It was a long short story. And it was interesting because Hemingway was one of the masters of dialogue in literature. And there was a great battle between between Hemingway and his mentor. I have just forgotten his name. Uh, she was also staying in Paris. Both of them claimed that they were masters and they taught each other. They taught uh, each other the art of writing dialogue. So Hemingway always claimed that he was a master of dialogue. And if you read Hemingway's stories carefully, you will see that he's compressing 40 pages of narration in 1 page of dialogue. Such was his great power of economy. Now, this is what Satyajit Ray also has, the great power of economy. Even though Satranj Ke Khiladi was a large epical canvas, he makes it short in 2 hours, 9 minutes. So in Zoltan Korda, we see that most of the dialogues are taken. And in these early films, when Hemingway was alive, he was taken along with the screenplay writers to assist in writing the plays. So Hemingway maintained most of the key dialogues. I'm just quoting a dialogue from Mr. Macomber and Mrs. Macomber one night because uh, Francis Macomber was very rich, so Mrs. Macomber did not divorce him. And Mrs. Macomber was too beautiful to divorce. So they kept up the relation. And now, when they come to a safari in Africa, this American couple, there's a British guide named Wilson, and Wilson is as an affair with Macomber. And the night from the tent, Margaret Macomber is going out and Francis Macomber is away. There's a wonderful dialogue sequence, 4 or 5 speeches, and it speaks the entire case history of what has happened in the past and their relations. Mr. Macomber asks, "Where are you going?" Mrs. Macomber answers, "To take some fresh air." "Do you think I will take anything? You said last time that this wouldn't happen again. Do you think I will take anything? Then Mrs. Macomber answers, I know you will, sweet. Now, this shows the dominating woman in Mr. Macomber's life. And at the end, when Mr. Macomber gains in courage and shoots the lion, Mrs. Macomber feels insecure that I can't control this man anymore. And he shoots uh, her husband as if she was trying to shoot the lion. Now, Wilson understood and he said, I began to like your husband. Why should you have to do this? You could have poisoned him. Now, these are dialogues which could be easily transferred into a film because of their great economy. Hemingway's novels, except for Island in the Stream and the posthumous novels, all the earlier novels are so full of telling dialogues that they are exactly filmic dialogues. So it was not difficult for a Hemingway novel to be transferred, adapted, transposed into a new form of art. My next reference is The Snows of Kilimanjaro, which is a 170-minute film. And it was, and in both, the hero was Gregory Peck. And if you remember Gregory Peck, he could exactly express what is spoken of as a famous characteristic of Ernest Hemingway's heroes, understatement. Now, Gregory Peck was a master of expressing these understatements, and he does it in The Snows of Kilimanjaro, which came out in 1952, with Gregory Peck as Harry Street, Susan Hayward as Helen, and Ava Gardner as Cynthia. Now, the story of Cynthia is totally inserted by the director Henry King, and it has affected, because sometimes not all interpolations fit in well. Because Snows of Kilimanjaro is a long short story by Hemingway, and Hemingway used to boast that it could generate 10 novels. He was so possessive about this work, and most of the story is in flashback. And well, the film also maintains the flashback technique. But the story of Cynthia is a distraction because the main thing was different. That was the entire career of Hemingway himself, his adultery, his falsehood, his remorse, his one night stands, and his hard drinking. Everything comes out in the flashback in The Snows of Kilimanjaro. And he is now dying because he was stuck up with a thorn, and he forgot to put iodine into that, and his foot has become, his right foot has caught gangrene. Now he is to die, and there was no medical help so far in Africa. They were on a safari, and he did not love this his new wife. He married him because of his wealth. And if you study the entire case history of Hemingway, you will see uh, a whole thesis on marriage, love, and divorce coming out of this life. It is a very interesting thing. The whole story of marriage, love, and divorce. And it is not true that Hemingway was an anti-feminist, because sometimes in Hemingway's stories, as in To Have and Have Not in other stories, I have seen that the writer is writing about the moments of divorce when the man is guilty, because the man is terribly selfish. Hemingway himself and his heroes are all self-centered, selfish heroes. and the women suffer. And in personal life, whenever the women left, Hemingway would say, she has left me, but he made it impossible for her to stay. Now, this is when he is dying, he is thinking of his writing, which cannot be completed. And this is a central metaphor of the Snows of Kilimanjaro. It is a beautiful film. Otherwise, in 1952, it's a beautiful film. And because the landscapes are there, the safari, the deer jumpings, the wildlife at night, the call of the hyena, everything was beautiful, and it recaptures the story beautifully. But there are certain psychological things in the writer, because whenever you think of Hemingway as Hemingway's stories as a subject of a film, you have to know his psychology. Basically, why he is so selfish, because he is a whole-time writer, and for writing he could do any nasty thing. This is not good. T.S. Eliot has said somewhere that love is greater than poetry. But Hemingway was always squeezing away the energy from the women for his art. And this was, and he was aware of that. He confessed into Heaven Have Not in a beautiful passage just before a divorce. And now these images of Harry's life in all stages, adultery, sex drives, writing as a whole-time job. Hemingway, in an interview to George Plimpton, Hemingway said, writing is a whole-time job, although a few hours in the day are spent in writing. And for this whole-time job, he used to use women, and this time Helen was a rich woman, and he had rejected all the women of the past, now for comfort, for shelter, and he starts abusing Helen uh, because she has given him too much of comfort. That is why he could not write. So this is another blame on blame he is giving before he's going. And the entire tension, apart from dying, is that he cannot finish his writing. Just like Keats's Terror of Death. Yeah, you must be remembering Keats's sonnet Terror of Death, where there is, in one stanza, there is a terrible fear that he will die before completing his work. The same tension is there in Harry Street, in the Snows of Kilimanjaro. Finally, to conclude, why this linking between Satyajit Ray and Hemingway, and in using two forms, but both of them were very close to the form of the film by virtue of their economy, by virtue of their visual presentation, by virtue of their uh, filmic capacity to write things. But so many things are buried. So many things are buried in their narrations, in their dialogues. As I have said, given an instance from Short Happy Life of Mr. Macomber, the dialogue, it speaks of the entire relation of the couple. Now, so many things are buried in Shatranj Ki Khiladi. It's an epic film because it can compete with any of the great films of India and maybe of the world, because it has two plots, two eco plots, and he has combined the two plots perfectly. The plot of Wajid Ali Shah, which was not there in Premchand's story, and the plot of the two chess players, and the subtle symbols. Iceberg, Hemingway used to call. Iceberg means only one part you can see of what I am doing, what I am writing. Even in film, the audience must know that we are seeing just one part of the iceberg, but the major part is under the water. We have to explore that. So we have dealt with two great filmic writers and two of the greatest of artists who were economical, who were poetical, who were suggestive. All said and done, I must say that uh, film cannot, film can adapt, modify, amplificate everything except for poetry. Because think of Whitman's last lines in The Song of Myself. Can it be transformed into a film? Whitman writes, concluding his Song of Myself, I bequeath myself to the dirt from the grass I grew from love. If you search for me again, search for me under my boot soles. You will hardly know who I am or what I mean to you. But I will filter and fiber your blood. Missing me at one place, search another. Failing to find me here, search another. I stop somewhere waiting for you. These things cannot be transferred into films. Poetry is sacred thing. Novel, drama, story, everything can be transferred to films, but not poetry. That way, poetry still has that aristocracy, that spiritual aristocracy, which cannot be equated or transformed into films. That's all. I will wait for the questions. Was I audible?
Yes, you were, sir. You were
So,
very much audible. Thank you. Do we have any questions, Dr. Sudhir Mungle? Dr. Mungle?
Just a minute, ma'am.
Yes, yes.
We are already running out of time. Therefore, it's better to skip questions. You just conclude the session.
Okay, okay, sir.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Professor Ghoshal. In fact, the title of your paper was Iceberg, the Art of Ernest Hemingway and Satyajit Ray. I must congratulate you, and I must say that you yourself followed the iceberg technique while delivering this lecture. Because although you tried to compress it just to be in time, but I know that there were many things that you have left unsaid probably, but you have the lecture that you have given, the lecture that you have delivered has indicated to the many things that can come out of this lecture. I'm honored to have chaired this session, Professor Ghoshal. Dr. Ghoshal began his lecture with the statement that films have gradually become very important. They have taken over books, whether it is a matter of it is, I would say, it's unfortunately that films have taken over. The keynote speaker today pointed out that films and books were both pandemic friendly. I would rather put it this way, that films in these pandemic times have proven to be proven their worth and proven to be much more important. You have taken up, Professor Ghoshal took up both the writers, Satyajit Ray and Ernest Hemingway, and he has spoken of Satyajit Ray's film Shatranj Ke Khiladi. And the important thing that he pointed out were the two different plots that he showed in the film. Although in the original novel, it is only the chess players that have been shown, but the plot of Wajid Ali Shah that Mr. Satyajit Ray took up in the film in itself showed his acumen as a filmmaker and the way that he could add to the original narrative. the two stories of Ernest Hemingway that you took up, the Kilimanjaro story and the other story, both that you took up, you showed how the iceberg principle has been followed, and how both these both the people that you have taken up, Satyajit Ray and Ernest Hemingway, how both of them, through their novels or through their short stories and through their films, how they have been able to, they have shown that how their writings can be easily transformed into films. So thank you so much, Professor Ghoshal. And I must thank the organizers. I must thank Dr. Anil Katte. I must thank Dr. Sharda Molwane, Dr. Sudhir Nikam, Dr. Prashant Mothe, for giving me this opportunity to chair this session and to interact with all the people here, all the participants over here. Thank you so much. I thank Professor Ghoshal for his lecture.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ghoshal and Professor Mrinal Srivastava ma'am, for this wonderful session. The organizing committee is thankful to you.